Anchor Point, Alaska, in my log cabin on the banks of the Anchor River, North America's farthest west highway point. Just got home a little bit ago, fed my birds, fed my turkeys, my roosters, my rooster and my guinea fowl. Brought some black sunflower seeds home for my chickadees and my juncos and my squirrel. Gets dark pretty fast after 4:30 here right now. So I got home just in time to get things done before it went completely dark out. Going to do some more Orthodox reading for us tonight, like I normally do. Yesterday went pretty decent. I prayed about going to this Christmas party beforehand, and people had a totally different personality than usually at work. I wish that would carry over and just always be like that. I don't know why some people think that a job has to be so uptight and kind of hostile, and people have so much sadness and brokenness, why we don't build each other up. Because that's what it's supposed to be about building each other up, increasing their knowledge, helping them to do better in their skills, and not just a competition where we're looking to destroy people or hold them down. And I'll do some more teaching on that eventually, because I think it's so important. We have to love each other and take care of each other. This life on this planet is so short. This isn't our final destination. This isn't where we were meant to stay. And there's never been a case, and there never will be a case, where people will make it to heaven by stepping on the heads of those other brothers and sisters that they put under their feet. That will never happen. It's never happened. It's not going to happen. And it never will. Those people will find themselves in a whole lot of pain at the end of their lives. We're to show our light to other people, to love even our enemies, to help them to get back on the right path, to pick up those of our brothers and sisters that have fallen, and to pray for them and to show them love and compassion. As hard as it is sometimes, I can't tell you how many times I've seen people totally turn around 180 degrees from where they were headed and what they were doing and change their lives for the better. And it's such a beautiful thing. I don't think there's any greater feeling than having someone that used to hate you embrace you in a hug. So the first reading that I'm going to read for us tonight is the teaching of Elder Philotheus and Modernity by Archpriest Vladislav Sipin. In the 1980s and 1990s, Russian society was seduced by liberal ideas, which, due to its legal inexperience, were presented and accepted as democratic values, despite the fact that these ideas focused on protecting the interests of minorities. In reality, are directly opposite to the principles of democracy, the rule of the people, the rule of the majority. As a result, the country rushed into the abyss, but at the last moment, at the turn of the millennium, by the mercy of God, it stopped before falling into it, after which a long and difficult process of sobering up began. Our recent past is a lesson that warns against the national self-denial and encourages us to rely on tradition. Unfortunately, America wasn't able to put on the brakes and stop itself from falling over to that abyss into hell. We have so many people that are still on TV, comedians on late night shows who are all members of Nickelodeon Island, G3 Island, Epstein Island, Disney Island, whatever you'd want to call it, of those names. It all represents the same people, same groups. Different things can be extracted from the domestic ideological heritage. In the 20th century, Russia introduced and offered to the world a utopian project borrowed from the outside, which, although it transformed beyond recognition and comparison with its German book original, in the end it was forced to renounce it due to its finally realized unrealizability. The dominant password at the final stage of the so called perestroika called on Russians to become disciples of the West, which, as propaganda advertising said, was ready to receive us with open arms, feed, drink, clothe, warm, protect, and make us happy. Frivolous trust in such cynical appeals led the country to dismemberment, to the threat of enslavement, again plunging it into that miserable state into which it had twice fallen, as if into a trap. In the past, at the beginning of the 17th century, during the period of the Seven Boyars, and after the successful conspiracy in February 1917, which became the prologue to the turmoil, the Civil War, awareness of the mortal danger hanging over the very existence of a sovereign Russia state as a result of an erroneous civilizational choice made against the background of the bankruptcy of the previously dominant pseudo-Marxist ideology prompted a search for a way out of the ideological impasse. Of the my throat's so dry. Of the influential historiographical ideas of the past, compatible with the orthodox vision of the historical process, the most conceptually meaningful seems to be the teaching whose quintessence is expressed in the laconic formula: Moscow is the third Rome. In terms of its strategic significance and pragmatic instrumentality, it can only be placed next to the famous Uvarov formula: orthodoxy, autocracy, nationality. In order to substantiate the idea of the succession of the Russian state from New Rome, the Roman Empire, the final destruction of which in 1453 was a shock to the Orthodox, ecumenical, and the entire Christian world, the monk of the Spaso Eleazar monastery, Philotheus, started from the apocalyptic image of the flight of the woman clothed with the sun, from the dragon to the Third Rome, which is the new Great Russia. The status of the Third Rome in Moscow is not an invention of a monk from the Eleazar monastery, but a legal doctrine, recorded, however, more than a century and a half after it, and one of the most important acts, namely in the Lade Charter of 1589 on the establishment of the Patriarchate in Moscow, under which the signature of Patriarch Jeremiah of Constantinople is put in the first place, into whose mouth the following speech is inserted in the Lade Charter. In truth, the Holy Spirit dwells in you, the pious Tsar, meaning Fyodor, the son of Ivan the Terrible, who occupied the royal throne at that time. And from God you will put this thought into action. Wherefore the old Rome has fallen by the heresy of the Apollinarius, and the second Rome, which is Constantinople, possesses the Hegarian grandchildren of the godless Turks. Thine, O pious Tsar, the great Russian kingdom, the third Rome, surpassing all in piety, and all the pious kingdom in thy being gathered into one. And thou art the one under heaven, the Christian king who is called in all the universe. In this fundamental legal act, the formula of the great elder is almost literally reproduced. After the collapse of the Russian Empire, when the Patriarchate of Constantinople had to look for new patrons, total amnesia prevailed in the Phanar regarding this grandiose event. Elder Philotheos, in his vision of the course of world history as is known, relies on the ancient scheme of the transfer of the center of Christian kingdom from one Rome to another, from the old Rome to the new Rome, Constantinople, and comes to the conclusion that after the capture of the new Rome by the Ottomans, the kingdom fled to the third Rome, which is the new Great Russia. Listen, sovereign, he wrote to the Grand Duke Vasily, Thou art the only Christian Tsar in all the heavens, although, as is known, Grand Duke Vasily III, being the grandnephew of the last emperor of the Romans, Constantine the Ninth, let's see, Constantine the Ninth, did not bear the royal title, which was already adopted only by his son Ivan, nicknamed the Terrible. But the idea of crowning the Tsar of Moscow, in view of the vacancy that had arisen after the fall of Constantinople, as they say, was then in the air. This saying of Philotheus contained not only a prediction about the upcoming coronation of the son of the addressee of his epistle to the throne, but also a prophetic vision of the greatness and power of the Russian state, which it achieved in times relatively remote from the era of the author of this aphorism. The historiographical teaching of Elder Philotheus about the Third Rome, about the place of Rus in world history, includes a prophetic statement. Two Romes have fallen, and the third stands, and the fourth will not be, which was interpreted in the past and is now interpreted in two different directions: triumphalist, optimistic, and apocalyptic. Despite the fact that the text of the epistles of the great elder does not contain contradictory meanings, although it gives rise to alternative interpretations which are chosen depending on the worldview of the interpreters, historians, publicists, philosophers. Such one sidedness in commentaries on the teaching of Elder Philotheus should be avoided. There's no doubt that the doctrine of the Third Rome has an eschatological perspective. Philotheus rejects the very possibility of the emergence of the Fourth Rome because he expects the end of history to be near. God's patience, the elder believes, will soon be exhausted, in view of the multiplication of sins in the very citadel of orthodoxy in the Third Rome. Therefore, he calls on the Grand Duke Vasily III in a letter addressed to him, which is called On the Correction of the Sign of the Cross and on the Sin of Sodomy, to take measures to cleanse the state entrusted to him by God from sinful defilement. Weeping to the mountaineer, I say that you have uprooted this bitter tares from your Orthodox kingdom, and the flame of the burning scarecrow in the stacks of Sodom testifies to it even now. And this abomination is abounded not only in the worldly, but also in others, about which I will be silent, what he understands. Alas for me, how long the merciful one endures for us without judging. The pathos of the writings of the elder Philotheus is in the call for the purification of morals in the Third Rome, in Russia, and, above all, for the eradication of the widespread sin of sodomy. The purification of morals in the Muscovite state, with unprecedented in Russia and possibly excessive zeal and scope, was taken up by the crowned son of Vasily the Terrible. How successfully this can be judged in different ways. A century and a half passed, and then the empire created by Peter the Great, when at the zenith of its power, after the victorious war with Napoleon, Russia for the first time really equaled the Rome of Caesar, Augustus, and Trajan. With the Christian empire of Justinian, paradoxically, the Third Rome was not written or talked about. This idea fell out of the official political and ecclesiastical vocabulary, remaining only a subject of historical research and interpretation, but it was remembered on the threshold of the 20th century, on the eve of the World War, when the Third Rome became one of the slogans of patriotic journalism. Literally, the three Romes, even if they are summarized geographically, leaving aside their chronological incompatibility, which is set in the very idea of the transfer of the empire, do not cover the entire space of the inhabited earth. Beyond the three Romes taken together, there is, to put it mildly, such a considerable magnitude as China, the celestial empire, which in itself is comparable to any of the three Romes. However, in the perspective of the expectation of the apocalypse, which is not for the first time in history accurately felt, but perhaps has never been so urgent before, the end of civilization symbolically marked by the old Rome, then the new Rome, and the third Rome, will probably coincide with the end of the world history. At the forefront of the currently developing world conflict, fraught with total cataclysm, is the confrontation between Russia and the overseas states, which still claim to be the world hegemon, and therefore the world genderem, which, after Russia's retirade from the world stage, remained the only superpower for the current term. In the context of the doctrine of the translation of empire, the geopolitical situation as developed after the collapse of the USSR, at least from Moscow, is perceived as a claim by the United States to the status of the Fourth Rome. The most popular slogan we have today is to repel the aggression of the West, which means the United States and its satellites, and Western and Central Europe against Russia. It must be clarified, however, that it is a question of confronting the post Christian, which in practice means the anti Christian West. Anti Christian, anti traditionalist, modernist tendencies dominate in the modern West, but Western society is not limited to them. Christian churches still exist there, and not only religious modernists, but also zealots of church tradition belong to them. Therefore, it would be more adequate, more delicate, and politically more advantageous to talk about Russia's opposition to the aggressive apostasy dominating in the West, the essence of which is the renunciation of its Christian history, and on the banners of which slogans in defense of same sex marriage, transgender surgery, and the legalization of euthanasia are written in the largest letters. While in terms of politics, the program of fighters against tradition is concentrated in the ideology of total globalism, or what is the same thing, globalist totalitarianism. This is why we have to be careful and not try to take over the world. There's not going to be anyone to protect us if we win. I know that might throw people off, but if we win and we dominate everything, there's not going to be anyone left to protect us from us. Related critics of the teaching of Elder Philotheus about the Third Rome either proceed from principled dissatisfaction with the very fact of the rise of Moscow and Russia, or make claims to the teaching of Elder Philotheus that are appropriate in relation to the scientific prognosis, which it is not, and on the basis raise the question of where the Third Rome went in the St. Petersburg period of our history, and even more so in the Soviet era, when the Orthodox Church was persecuted and discriminated against. But the doctrine of the Third Rome is a remarkably functioning ideologium that grew on the soil of the Orthodox worldview, similar to the above mentioned Uvarov formula: orthodoxy, autocracy, nationality, and not a futurological forecast. In the world of alternative ideas, at the end of the 18th century, an equally famous slogan was formulated: liberty, equality, and fraternity. To put it mildly, it does not stand up to the criteria of scientific validity. It is extremely far from the real state of society in the states that profess the slogan doctrinally and officially. Nevertheless, it has not been withdrawn from use to this day, probably because it has not lost its ability to influence mass consciousness, performing the role of no longer an exciter as it was at the dawn of its existence, but a tranquilizer for the masses. But is everything well with the adherence to traditional religious and moral values, which the Third Rome is called upon to guard in modern Russia? A hastily optimistic answer to this question would be a manifestation of frivolity and national pride. In the 1990s, deviations, the legalization of which was presented in our country as the highest achievement of democracy, were unrestrainedly advertised on television. In particular, and for this reason, our society is not completely alien to the vices that, in his time, half a millennium ago, Elder Philotheus castigated, demanding their eradication. Historically, we have behind us the apostasy of the Intelligista, which became the main engine of the revolution that broke out in February 1917, which, as everyone well knows, was followed by the inevitable October Revolution, which opened an era of persecution of the Orthodox Church and discrimination against the faithful of all religions. The collapse of the Soviet Union brought with it a humiliating servility to so-called Western values, not puritanical but liberal, The ethics of consumerism was introduced to the masses with the probable aim of diverting attention from the plundering of state property by a narrow circle of nouveau rich. And that's exactly what happened in the US, whose social origin was mainly from the second echelon of the Soviet communist nomenclatura. And ours came from the globalist nomenclature, which just means name, nomenclatura. But now in Russia, there is a visible reversal. In various spheres, there's a process of sobering up and revaluation of our values. Seduction by liberal ideology is already a phenomenon from the past. Such a metamorphosis of public consciousness is seen as the main guarantee that relying on the explicit and tacit support of the majority of humanity, the so called South, and on the sympathy of the defenders of traditional ethics in the West, adherents of both consistently right wing and radical left wing political orientations who do not agree with the loss of sovereignty of their countries. Russia will survive, and the forces hostile to it from hell will stop at its doorstep. Only in this case will history continue, for according to the prophetic foresight of the elder Philotheus, there will be no fourth Rome. Because if Russia does not hold out, then, as it is now seen from Russia itself, any positive meaning in the continuation of history will disappear. It's from Archpriest Vladislav Sipin, November 1st, 2024. I see so many people watching Jimmy Kimmel and Tom Hanks, James Clooney, all these people who spent time on Nickelodeon Island, as I like to call it, since Nickelodeon has chosen Epstein Island to be on its very, very signature, on its very trademark, and Disney with its perverse cartoons, with all of its perverse actors and actresses. It's really gross and shameful what America's become. And it's our duty to not support any of these companies, any of these actors and actresses. We need to boycott them and tell everyone in our families to boycott them, to not allow any of their materials into our homes, into our lives, to not let the poison of the filth that they put out to poison the minds of children. It's just so sad how low America continues to go. But I have noticed there seems to be an awakening happening. I see so many actors and actresses becoming Christian now, speaking out against the people that are trying to do us so much harm in our country. And they need to be supported. All these people that have opened their eyes to God and are starting to speak out are being attacked by Hollywood and by the media, by the globalist agenda. We need to defend them as much as we can and to stand with them. I'm so glad when I see some of these. I'm just drawing a blank on some of the names right now. I apologize. But some of these rappers, some of these actresses standing up and saying that they believe in God. Such a beautiful thing. So I think I'm going to find some more readings for us in a bit. I'm going to need to get some coffee in me or something. I'm just feeling kind of wiped out after having such a long day. But I'll be back a little bit later on and I'll do some more reading. Thank you all so much, brothers and sisters, for joining me. And I'll see you all again in a little bit. God bless.